everyone, my name is Paloma, and today for our group presentation, we're going to be focusing on the Boston student housing crisis, and we're doing this by looking at 3 different universities in the Boston area that have had similar issues regarding housing. So the first one we're going to be looking at today is Northeastern University, and Northeastern is a private research university with its main campus being in Boston, and it has co-ops built into its curriculum as well as multiple study abroad opportunities, and it is 73 acres large, and for a private school, it's considered to have a relatively large student population. So Northeastern Housing has housing all throughout campus, depending on financial situation. There are some single-style dorms, some doubles, apartment-style dorms that have both singles and doubles in them, and these are usually offered in both standard and economy prices in order to help people with different financial situations. However, Northeastern used to guarantee housing for students all 4 years, but with the recent uptick in enrollment, Northeastern has changed its housing policy to accommodate the growing size of the student body. So, beginning in fall 2023, Northeastern will only guarantee first and second year housing for the incoming classes, while some accommodations will still be available to students beyond their second year. And prior to this change, Northeastern offered its students guaranteed housing all 4 years. And to clarify, this change is not effective immediately, so students that have enrolled in Northeastern before fall 2023 are still guaranteed housing on campus all 4 years, but students that start their enrollment in fall 2023 are not guaranteed upperclassmen housing. And I believe that this is pretty unfair because a lot of students have financial aid packages that include housing. So if a student is interested in Northeastern but are worried about not being able to find housing in their upperclassmen years, that may deter them towards another school, which could actually hurt Northeastern admissions in the long run. And that is something that students are factoring into their choice. And I believe that the large student population that's causing to be a housing crisis is a result of over-admitting in the class of 2025. And Northeastern needs to find a better way to resolve their housing situation because right now, gentrifying the area and buying new buildings has its limits, and future students now have to make sure that they're finding a place to live on top of being on top of all their schoolwork, which is very difficult to manage as a student at such a rigorous university. And making housing available but not guaranteed is not a promising answer. So for this project, I interviewed 2 students in order to get more inside scope and to see what exactly is going on. And the first student I interviewed is an anonymous second year that's living in an international village forced double. So she is a business and data science major. And when I spoke with her in my interview, she said that she has been sick a lot, which is not something that's typical for her. And she believes it's because her roommate, who she shares this confined space with, is also tends to get sick a lot. She has been getting sick a lot because of sharing this space with her. And the girl that I interviewed sleeps on the top bunk and the roommate's on the bottom bunk. So anytime the roommate is up with roommate coughing, it causes the bed to shake, which has caused the girl that I interviewed to have a hard time sleeping. And one point, there was one time that her roommate was just so sick that she went out of her way to book a hotel just for a few days so she could rest without hearing her roommate cough. And the school did not help her financially through this. This is something that she went out of the way to do for herself. And she's also just a very tall person, so sleeping on a top bunk is impractical in the first place. And she is a light sleeper as well. So the combination of everything has made this a very hard living situation for her this year. And she also described just not being able to have any personal space, not being able to move or stretch comfortably without being on top of each other basically was an issue she says she has every day. And she specifically said to me that when you go to such a high pressure school like Northeastern, housing is not something she really wanted to be concerned about because this year she was actually trying to figure out what to declare her major, and having to deal with these housing issues was something that has been very difficult for her. Fortunately, she got really lucky and she was able to find an off-campus sublet apartment with her roommate in order to have some space, but this is not something that a lot of people are able to find. She was just very lucky with the friends that she knew. So the second student I interviewed actually had a pipe burst in her room in Stetson West, and she is a first-year international affairs and business major. And this is what Northeastern put as the solution to the pipe bursting in her dorm. She's a first year, so having to adjust to being in a completely new environment was already difficult enough for her. And when I was checking in on her when the situation was going on, she said the bag was still there and that it was just very humid in her room because Stetson West already doesn't have AC. So with the pipe bursting and there being water flooded everywhere, it was just a very uncomfortable situation for anybody. And it was extremely difficult for her because she is financially independent. And the morning that her pipe burst, when she came into contact with the RA was irresponsive and she had a shift in like an hour. And then she had to miss her shift in order to have to deal with what's going on in her room. And eventually they did come, but her being financially independent and missing a shift is not something she should do as a result of the RA not coming in time. So their solution for a few days was this tarp. And eventually the pipe, she told me the pipe was fixed and sent me this picture. But however, it still does not look like the most effective fixture. So now she is very worried about housing for next year because she has one of the financial aid packages that includes housing. And she has not had the best experience this year. So she's really hoping that by next year, she's able to have a better option. So as you can see in this graph here, in 2017 through 2019, on and off campus pricing was it was the same until right here in 2020, on campus pricing started being a little bit more expensive, which could be a result from the pandemic. And from here, they just kept on increasing at a rate of 3.1%. And also, this over here, the 2023 to 2025 are estimates based on the trends that these are increasing at. And although off-campus is a little bit more inexpensive, a lot of off-campus apartments don't include furniture. So once you add that factor into it, it ends up being almost about the same. And finding an off-campus apartment as a student is very stressful on top of all the schoolwork. Having to contact a realtor and view several places is a very time-consuming commitment. And it is estimated that the total that students are going to have to pay in housing and dining over the next 4 years is 88 grand. And if this trend keeps going in the way that it's going right now, that number could increase, which causes the prices to be insanely expensive, which is not something that should be happening at such an amazing school.
Now I'll be talking about Boston University and how they've contributed to the gentrification and the housing crisis in the Kenmore Square area and the general area surrounding BU. On Boston University's website, they boast about their largest applicant pool ever, clearly demonstrating their excitement at their growing student body. Their pool this year was around 81,000 students, with early decision applications rising nearly 12%. With the pressure for universities to aim to become more and more prestigious and competitive, it's not surprising that they're thrilled about these increases. But along with the rising student population, the avenues surrounding BU's medical campus have seen a 65% increase in the median home value, while they've seen a 10% decrease in African American population. These are just two examples of growing student bodies driving housing prices up and diversity down. Next, this is a timeline demonstrating the number of buildings that BU has bought or acquired over the years. Not only does the student body continue to expand, but the university itself does as well. BU owns a total of 343 buildings in Boston and continues to purchase increasing numbers of buildings year after year. And according to the timeline you can see on the screen, the exponential growth of their campus is quite large, and they've begun to take over the whole Kenmore Square area. Now, these texts on the screen demonstrate real-life examples of how students continue to keep leases and houses within their possession. The influx of students is not only driving prices up, but making it increasingly more difficult for working-class families to even break into the buying market near college areas. A large majority of houses near BU's campus used to be predominantly owned by working-class families because they were less expensive and easily accessible by T or by bus. The continued trading of leases, subletting, and student ownership of these buildings make it quite difficult for those working-class families who may still be able to afford rent in these areas to try and obtain a lease. Sometimes parents of students will even purchase apartments near BU or other universities and rent them out for profit when their student isn't living there. One specific major event that BU made news for was the selling of a large chunk of their property in the Kenmore Square area. They sold it to a realty company that's now building luxury hotels on the land. The money from the sale of this property was used to build a new data science center without thinking about the effects of the sale on the community around them. These images on the screen are taken from the early 1900s, and they show that the neighborhood was once filled with little sandwich shops and working class people, but it's now dominated by wealthy college students. In an article published by the BU EDU, Nancy Salzman commented, as the movement to suburbia accelerated, houses on Bay State Road were subdivided into apartments. Beginning in the 1950s, the influx of BU students created a new demand for fast food stores, discos, and small shops. This is just commentary on how, even in the 1950s, this was the beginning of BU's contribution to gentrifying the area, and these images show just how modernized it looks. The article then goes on to discuss how the clubs began to pop up to serve the youthful audience. And then when the BU neighborhood experienced drop in prices in 1983, the university bought an old building on Beacon Street and partnered with Barnes & Nobles to create one of the largest university bookstores in the country. This was a major turning point for the neighborhood towards a college central area. Eventually, BU went on to publicly declare their desire to expand and focus on dominating the area. They worked with the city to revitalize the area as they saw fit. A previous employee at BU commented that BU's interest here was not teaching or research, it was urban renewal. This once again demonstrates similar motives for profit and prestige rather than thinking about the housing and gentrification effects they might be having.
Now I'll be talking about the housing crisis situation in Suffolk University. Starting in 2007, when the institution tried to expand to downtown Crossing, this plan was very ambitious and was made in November 2007. However, despite having an ambitious plan, as you can see from the slides, it still expressed a desire to avoid conflicts with other neighborhoods. And so Suffolk designated Beacon Hill and a stretch of downtown Crossing from Boylston to Winter Streets as non-expansion locations. And Suffolk instead chose to develop to other sections of downtown Crossing and parts around Government Center. And former state representative Marty Waltz says that this is a very significant expansion for Suffolk that needs to be very thoroughly planned so that no one of the downtown neighborhoods bears too much. However, despite Suffolk trying to exert empathic thinking toward the neighborhoods with this plan, it still inevitably faced conflicts with other neighborhoods as it tried to expand later on, as you can see by this headline, and I will go over this later on. Suffolk particularly had a lot of tensions with Beacon Hill because it tried to expand into that neighborhood for so many years. Yet the two were able to reach an extraordinary compromise in 2008. The gist of this compromise was that Suffolk would stop expanding to Beacon Hill, and that in exchange, Beacon Hill would support Suffolk's future expansion efforts elsewhere. And this is outlined in this map. And the residents of Beacon Hill were very happy, along with the people in Suffolk, because the two have been combating each other for a long time, and they finally seemed to reach an agreement. In fact, John Newsey, Suffolk's vice president for external affairs, thought that this agreement shifts the university's whole center of gravity away from Beacon Hill. This bodes well for a peaceful coexistence between the Beacon Hill neighborhood and Suffolk. However, as I said before, Suffolk would inevitably face tension as it tried to expand elsewhere, particularly with EC in 2017, because in the fall 2017 semester, Suffolk Senior Vice President for External Affairs, John Newsey, who I mentioned in the last slide, stated that the school wanted to ensure that students would have a guaranteed 2 years of housing by the next school year. And residents such as Maureen White were very frustrated. They believe that East Boston has already been harmed so much due to the university's infiltration, and they have had enough. In fact, the residents such as Maureen were willing to fight for their neighborhood and to protect it from further expansion. Maureen stated that we have the airport, which poisons our air. They wanted to put a casino here, but the neighborhood is no stranger to organizing to protect our neighborhoods. We are not afraid to do that. She expressed that expanding your real estate into our neighborhood is not solving the problem. We are the ones paying the price. But it's not just the residents that are frustrated with the situation. The problem is that even if Suffolk wanted to be kinder to the residents by not expanding there, Suffolk still feels a pressure to expand and further expand its neighborhoods because students really want more affordable housing options. And those more affordable options tend to be on campus options because off-campus housing is just really expensive, as we can see with the story of Alexandra Sargo, an accounting major at Suffolk who struggled to find housing in Boston within a price range she could manage and resorted to commuting to Suffolk from Providence in the following semester because the prices were so high in Boston, and hence she resorted to commuting. And in her East Boston apartment, she paid $600 a month in rent along with utilities for her room. The room was the size of a storage closet, and yet she shared it with 5 people. She lamented that it is just too expensive for me to be living in the Boston area. The money I'm scraping together each month for rent is money I could be using for other things, such as paying my loans off or buying a car. And people such as attorney and activist Randy Shaw empathizes with these students because there are so many factors against them: corrupt policies and insufficient legitimate tenant protections, and the fact that rent control, which is supposed to prevent landowners from making the renting process too high, became illegal in Mass in 1994, and since then, tenants' rent has skyrocketed without supervision. Also, new housing development can only proceed with a two-thirds majority. And in the 1970s, exclusionary zoning laws only permitted single-family homes to exist in neighborhoods, and Shaw postulates that people attempted to find many ways to manipulate the system to keep denying housing to others. He accentuated that now, if you talk about building a fourplex in a single-family home neighborhood, people are like, you're destroying our neighborhood character. People find all kinds of reasons to deny housing, and that's why we're in this mess. Now, it's going to be really hard to find a solution. Maureen White, like I mentioned before, said that decreasing enrollment numbers would help, and yet this would harm the students who want to receive a proper college education. I interviewed Suffolk professor Robert Allison, who has a lot of experience dealing with housing issues in Boston, particularly gentrification. He acknowledges that building more dorms would enable students with more affordable options, but yet this would also harm Bostonian residents as more dorms will be built in their neighborhoods. And if the colleges decide to just not expand at, at all, the students just have to confine themselves in housing that empties their wallets more rapidly than they wish. And I asked Professor Allison whether we can help everyone affected by the Suffolk's crisis fairly: the students who need affordable housing, the residents who feel violated, and the school that wants to accommodate more students. But he notes that,
there's no real easy solutions to this.
unfortunately, so the Boston housing crisis situation, a lot of it starts from the fact that off-campus housing has just, their prices have skyrocketed over the years. And Professor Allison can affirm that this trend is happening.
When I moved to Boston in 1984, I paid $295 a month for a one-bedroom apartment in East Boston. My wife and I had an apartment in South Boston. The rent was about $600 a month. And the building was sold in 1995 for $175,000. The landlord offered it to all of the tenants in the building. None of us could afford that, but each of us was able to buy a house in the neighborhood. The next year, each unit in that building, it was a triple decker, was on the market for $199,000.
If the Boston community unites to tackle the issue while acknowledging how it affects people of all walks of life, perhaps we can devise a solution that promotes stronger harmony between colleges and the residents that surround them. Colleges need to realize that the world outside their campus deserves just as much empathy as that on their campus. Here, those were our sources, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful day.